What's up, guys? This is Boondocks, and I'm going to be trying to show people how to play Magic. I'm going to be using Magic 2015. The reason I'm going to be using this particular program is, well, because I don't really have a camera that can effectively film real Magic cards, which in all honesty is probably the better way of teaching. And in all honesty, the best way of teaching someone how to play Magic is to do just that, play Magic. So the question got put to me as well as to what the different types of colors are and pretty much how they interact with each other. So I'm going to try to break this episode up into different sections and try to make quick links, which I'll be showing at the beginning of the video to jump to the different parts. So I apologize if some of this, if you're looking for one specific thing to learn, and I go all the way to the most basic dumb stuff like mana cost, because to some people it might seem dumb, but when you're first learning, it's definitely needed. So to begin with, there's pretty much 6 different colored cards, not counting Eldrazi. Eldrazi are technically colorless, they're not artifacts, they're just their own thing. But they're only out with certain sets, and I don't believe they came out again with 2015. They were with 2014 and back during the Eldrazi set. So that leaves you with the white, which are plains, blue, islands, black swamps, red mountains, green forests, and artifacts. Each one of the different colors have different types of abilities that are associated with them. So for starters, let's go with white. White is very unique compared to most other color sets, namely because it does maintain some type of control through enchantments and a little bit of removal, but basically white falls into 2 main categories in general. Relatively inexpensive but low damaging creatures that then build up to high cost, high powerful creatures with very special abilities, typically angels or really powerful humans. As you can see, we have Aegis Angel, flying, 5/5. When Aegis Angel enters the battlefield under another target permanent gains indestructibility, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, typically white decks have a lot of low damage creatures that are very inexpensive and try to build up later while protecting itself in sheer numbers, lifelink, which lets you steal back life, and enchantments. Enchantments to both make your creatures stronger, or enchantments like Arrest here, which says enchanted creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So basically, white is all about overwhelming your enemy with numbers, protecting yourself, and controlling your enemy by preventing their creatures from attacking you. So then we move on to blue. This is probably my least favorite color, just because it doesn't fit my particular playstyle. Blue comes down to a lot of interesting control. So blue typically has flying creatures as far as actual creatures go, or creatures that have special effects that will prevent your enemy from taking certain actions or make them take certain actions like discarding cards. Typically, blue is set up to annoy your enemy and prevent them from doing what they want with things like Favor Snag. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Its controller loses 1 life. So after your enemy just played his huge monster, and now it goes back to his turn, but you have 1 mana, as soon as that monster swings to attack, you send that huge monster back to his hand, and now he has to pay the whole mana cost to play it again, as well as having to wait another turn to attack with it. There's also things that will interrupt target cast, such as counter, target non-creature spell. A counter actually destroys whatever spell they're trying to cast before they even get to do it. So once again, blue is typically made up of cards that control your enemy and flying cards, as you can see here. There are certain other things that don't quite fall into that, like the merfolk and all that, but it gets a little tricky at that. Also, blue's really fun at controlling the flow of the game. Target player takes an extra turn after this one. Ridiculous. So, we move on to black. Black has a little bit of everything. Black usually focuses on hurting your enemy and taking their life to become yours. Black has some of the only cards in the game that say destroy target creature. There's no other real stipulations other than target non-black, target non-artifact, things like that, or have a slightly higher casting cost and then just target anything you want. So one of the cool things about the black cards as well is that a lot of the creatures have Undying or Death Touch or other things that make it very hard for your enemy to kill your creatures and easy for you to kill theirs. In addition to that, black decks typically have the ability to summon your creatures back from the dead. That's why there's a lot of vampires, spirits, zombies, and skeletons inside red decks. And then you can build all the way up, or not red decks, sorry, black decks. You build all the way up to very powerful demons near the higher tier casting cost. And that's when you can become pretty devastating. So black comes down a lot to killing off your enemy, preventing them from being able to do stuff to you, taking life from them, gaining it back for yourself in return, and working your way up to summoning big demons or having undying forces. So black is a lot of fun in my opinion because you can kill what's already out there and you don't have to worry about trying to wait with like in a blue deck to target certain creatures. Now red is once again a little bit of control, but in a different type from blue or black, where blue counters a target before it even gets on the field and black just kills it outright. The way red decks work is they can do damage to creatures. But the other cool thing is not only can it do damage to creatures, but also to players. So you get certain spells like Fireball, which you can make do ridiculous amounts of damage to enemy players. In addition to that, they typically have a lot of small 1/1 creatures, all the way up through like 4 or 5s. They typically have a lot of attack strength with low defense, and typically don't have all that much in protecting themselves. It's more about just going all out offensive on your opponent, and I find it to be pretty fun. For instance, right here you have Marauding Maulhorn. He has to attack every turn that he can, and then he's a 5/3. So he's got the 5 attack and only 3 defense. And then when you get to the end areas of, come on, zoom out. When you get to the end tiers for red, that's when you start getting into the dragons. And dragon cards, they're pretty expensive, but they're really nice because they have flying and they have a lot of the times they have abilities that'll buff their attack. So you can fly over the head of your enemy and do massive amounts of damage. And to me, that's a lot of fun. So, base level, the red is more or less designed to just do direct damage to your opponent. And yeah, that's pretty much all it is. It's a lot about trying to rush down and do more damage to the enemy before they can do damage to you. And it's one of my more fun types to play, in my opinion. Then green. Green's different than the other ones once again. They have added cards like Fight In, which have changed the paradigm a little bit, but typically the way green has worked in general is that you try to get as much land out as possible early on, so that way you can summon really big creatures. So typically you have low-level cards such as Elvish Visionary that let you draw more at the beginning, or you have Satyr Wayfinder, which lets you draw 4 cards, play 1 land from it, and put the rest in your graveyard, which in some decks will work, not all, mind you. Where else? What's this guy got? Enters the battlefield, you may put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So it's just more ways. You're trying to get as much mana out as possible early on, so that way you can play big creatures that will be a lot harder to stop, such as the Terra Stomper. So then they also have extra effects which can make them pretty powerful. In addition to that, green typically doesn't have normal enchantments. By normal enchantments, typically what you would do is, or in that matter, it doesn't even have normal crowd control. Normally an enchantment you would just attach to a creature and it would be strong until that enchantment's destroyed or the creature's destroyed. Or you have crowd control where you can directly target enemy creatures and get them killed. Part of the reason I always liked green was because you can actually bait them in. You can bait your enemies in and they can sort of kill themselves. And you could do that with relatively inexpensive cards like Titanic Growth. So the way that this is done is because Titanic Growth is an instant. Assuming you have a 2/2 out on the field and your opponent has a 4/4, that's just been a real pain in the ass to you. Well, you either wait until that 4/4 attacks, block it with the 2/2, and then play Titanic Growth, making it now a 6/6, or you can swing, hope he attacks or blocks you. So now you can either kill that 4/4 or bump up your 2/2 and do 6 damage before your enemy even knows what hit him. So I've always liked green because it's a little bit sneaky and you play mind games with it. Even more than you would think because it's not a blue deck. Green's supposed to be about like ferocity and all of that, but in my opinion it's pretty damn sneaky because you have to trick your opponent. And you can sometimes trick them out too by in person if you're holding extra cards. When they attack or when you attack, you can start pulling one over to your hand and just holding it out and kind of being an ass about it. But they might think that you have an instant to bump up your card. Then the last quote-unquote color is artifacts. Artifacts are technically colorless. You can put them in any deck you want. They are called artifacts. Some of the older, instead of they'll be called artifact creature and artifact equipment as opposed to other things that are spells and so on. In previous incarnations, there have been artifacts that are also associated with a given color, but that's a lot more rare. So artifacts come in certain interesting proportions. They come as equip cards, which can be a lot of fun. You first cast the equip card, you put it on the field. The equip card will have something that says equip cost of 1, so you have to pay 1 more to put it onto a creature. Now that creature has flying. It's kind of cool because you can give creatures different benefits and things work out. They also can come with certain weird effects like you gain 5 life or pay 2, tap, gain 5 life, and shuffle this back into your deck. So artifacts are really hard to pin down exactly what they do. The main thing is that you can use them to enhance certain portions of your deck or cover areas that you are lacking. For instance, if you're running a strong burn deck with red and then you realize you don't have any creatures that really suit you from the red, well, you could toss in an artifact creature. Because now I'll have a 3/3 defender that can also turn into flying if need be. Or if you want something really weird like the Creepy Doll, now you can have a chance at destroying all of your enemies. So artifacts are definitely a little bit weird. And that's pretty much all the colors. Now the next thing I'm going to be talking about, and on second thought, I think I'm actually going to break up these videos from one to the next because it took me a little bit longer to talk about those colors than I thought it would. So as far as card types go, again, artifacts, they're not really going to change, but you have really 5 main types. You have creatures, instants, sorceries, and enchantments. In addition to that, you also have lands. I'm not going to talk too much about lands because they're pretty straightforward. You use them as mana, and you need mana in order to cast any spell in the game, with the exception of a slight few where you can pay mana or pay life or sacrifice creatures, that type of thing. However, there's also dual colored lands. And typically dual colored lands have special features associated with them. They come in they do come in every color combination you can think of, such as green-blue, red-white, black-red, whatever. And a lot of times they come with some sort of stipulation. For instance, when you play this card, it's going to come in tapped. So you won't be able to use it the first turn you play it, but you will be able to tap it for either a white plains or a blue island. And that makes them very, very sought after. Typically, basic dual lands, they have the quote-unquote sticker value in real life of about $6. And because of that, just by finding a dual land in your booster pack, you've already paid for your booster pack in the grand scheme of things, because dual lands are really, really easy to trade because everyone knows the value of them, and it's just really easy. And then you have specialty lands, such as Radiant Fountain. When Radiant Fountain enters the battlefield, gain 2 life. You may add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Keyword being colorless. So that's not quite as powerful, but you get to gain 2 life. So in some situations, if you have a life gain deck, it might be helpful. So we'll then go back to our spells and try to give a basic statements of how different card types work, I guess. I mean, it's a little bit tricky to get the exact wordage out that I'm looking for, but here we go anyway. So to begin with, we have creatures. Creatures come in many shapes, sizes, casting costs, and so on. I think the most expensive one in the game to cast was, not including fake ones like Big Furry Monster, I can't remember his name, but I think it was 15 or 14 casting costs, which is pretty ridiculous. But creature cards are your bread and butter for most decks. They are what you use to attack and do damage to your enemies, and depending on what creatures you have, can make or break your deck. So each one has different abilities, and I'll try to go over those in a different video most likely. But we're just going to start with the basics. So, we're going to move on to a different card that has a higher casting cost of just 1. So, let's go with Attendant Knight. As you can see, Attendant Knight has a casting cost of 3. That can be easily seen right here. So the casting cost of 3 means it's going to cost 1 plane, which you can tell thanks to the symbol, and 2 of any other mana. This symbol is colorless, so that can be represented by any mana color, regardless of whether it's black, which is quote-unquote the polar opposite of the white decks. It's irrelevant. You can use anything you want. Then we'll move on to the second main part of the creature card, and it's what every creature card has, and that's their attack and defense. So this basically says that the monster, this creature, has 2 attack and 2 defense. If their defense falls to 0 at any time during any turn, this creature will die. Doesn't matter what else. The 2 means that when either attacking a player or attacking another creature, it'll do 2 damage to either of those. Then you also have your abilities that this particular card has. For instance, it has First Strike, and a specialty that when Attendant Knight enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 white soldier creature token onto the battlefield. Now, this is a pretty decent card considering it's a common. And as far as the attack and defense go, it's really something that you'll have to play around with, because I can explain different scenarios from morning to night and show how the defense can be altered to either protect or kill creatures. And it just becomes a major mess. It's one of those things that you have to understand the basics, and then from there expand upon it through practice. So as you can see, this, like I was saying before, this costs 3 to play, but then you have another card that still costs 3 to play. The difference being this card takes 2 planes and then 1 of any color, whereas the other one costs only 1 plane and then 2 of any color. They both require the same amount of mana, but this one's a little bit more specific. You need at least 2 planes. If you have 1 plane and then 5 mountains, you cannot play Banisher Priest. So you have to try to make sure that you're using the right amount of mana for the right cast. The last thing on creature cards, in all honesty, is their type. Each creature is going to come with at least 1 type. So this creature technically has 2. It's a human and a cleric. So typically they'll have what their species is and then what their job is, if that makes sense. For instance, if we come down here, you'll just see that there's a griffin. Now, there could have been a person riding him on the picture, and that could have been called a griffin soldier or something such as that. Or, let's see, elf shaman. Here's a human shaman, and here's an elf shaman. Shows their race and then their position. Plant hydra. So, it's a plant, which is their race or species, followed by hydra, which is pretty much what it is, and that's why it has all the multiple heads. So, based off of what those cards have written on them, different effects come into play. A great example of this will be Advocate of the Beast. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on target beast creature you control. What that means is that you can only put those counters on other beasts. So a creature such as a wolf, who you would think would be a beast creature, you could put a counter on, but because it doesn't say wolf beast or beast wolf, it would say wolf beast in all honesty, but because it doesn't say that, you can't put those tokens. Instead, if we come over here, we see a fish beast. So now you could put the +1/+1 counters on the fish beast. So as a quick recap, you have your casting cost, your attack, defense, what this creature can do. A lot of times with these given words, it's something that you need to learn through practice. I might try to teach them in later videos, but not for now. And then the last thing is the creature type. Fish beast, human advisor, elf shaman, whatever. And that's how creatures work. Next, we're going to do instants. Now, instants are very interesting. They are unique to other spell cards because you can play them whenever you feel like. You can play them on your turn. You can play them while you're attacking. You can play them during your opponent's turn. When your opponent's about to say, "Oh, I'm done," you can activate instances anytime you want. Even if you're blocking and he's attacking you in the face, you can cast instances to save your life, kill enemies, buff up your creatures, whatever needs to be done. So, for instance, we have this guy. Instant. Destroy target attacking or blocking creature. Perfect. Casting cost of 4. Same as the creature card. Same with all magic cards. It tells you how much it's going to cost to spend. And then destroy target attacking or blocking creature. Just do what it says on the card. Now, if it was a blue card, they might have an instance to block this, and then there's a whole stacking procedure, but we'll not get into that. Instances are relatively straightforward. You do whatever the card says, and you can play it whenever you feel like, assuming you have the mana saved. So, things like Primal Bellows can become very powerful, because target creature gains +1/+1 until end of turn for each forest you control. What this means is that, with the right amount of forests, you can easily destroy almost any creature card by only having 1 forest available, and then letting your creature get attacked, or either block an attacking creature with one of yours, or wait till your attacking creature gets blocked, and then buff them up so much and kill them. Also, different things like when your opponent says, "No, I'm going to let this damage come through." Boom, drop 2 Titanic Growths on them and do +8 damage. Or you can do things such as Fog. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. In case your enemy drops a crazy fireball that's just going to kill all your creatures, this will even prevent that. So, that's how instances work. Sorceries are very similar to instances. By that, I mean, they do a lot of the same things. They'll destroy permanents. They will buff creatures for one turn, such as Hunter's Prowess. Until end of turn, target creature gets +3/+3 in trample. They'll have special crazy effects like summoning weird tokens or searching for mana. Again, they'll have the same casting cost. The difference between a sorcery and an instant, though, is very, very important. An instant can be played whenever you want. A sorcery can only be played during your main steps. And as I will get into it a little bit later, there's a certain procedural setup to Magic that a lot of people don't think about. But it goes like such. Upkeep, main step, combat phase, second main step, end step. So, there's actually 5 different points throughout. Sorceries can only be played during your main step. So that means after upkeep, before you attack, after you attack, but before you end your turn. And you cannot play them during your opponent's turn. So, unlike an instant where you can actually save up mana just to make sure that your opponent can't do anything to you, you need to use your sorceries before you end your turn. So that way you can get the mana back next turn as needed. Sorceries can be very powerful though, exile target creature and enchantment, things like that. But fundamentally, they are very similar to instance cards. Just do what they say on them. But remember, you can only cast them during your main step. So, that takes us to enchantments. Enchantments are very cool. Enchantments are spells that aren't creatures. Creatures count as spells, by the way. If you ever come across a card that says counter target spell, that means creatures as well. Don't let that confuse you. Enchantments, however, stay on the field. And a lot of the times they'll have things that buff your creatures, can do negative side effects to your enemy, or buff you as a player. So, Nimbus Wings. Enchanted creature gets +1/+2 and has flying forever, because now that creature is enchanted. You also have to pay attention because this is an aura. Different enchantments can have different names associated with them. This is important because some cards gain buffs from having specifically auras on them. Then you have another enchantment, again, same casting cost type system. This you can actually enchant your opponent's creatures. This will prevent your opponent from attacking, blocking, or activating a creature's abilities, which are excellent. Then you have field enchantments that can buff you. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw an extra card. It doesn't say extra card, but it's pretty much saying that. If you control the creature with the greatest power, or tied for the greatest power. So that means that at the beginning of each turn, you have a chance of drawing 2 cards instead of 1, and therefore gaining an advantage over your enemy. There's also cards that will negatively impact your opponent. Let's see if I can find one real quick. By negatively impact your opponent, I mean for an extended period of time, such as Sanguine Blood. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. That's pretty devastating, all things considered. So, that's how enchantments work. You just put them on the field after paying their casting costs, and they don't go away unless your opponent destroys them, or if you attach it to a creature, the creature dies. They're slightly similar to an equip card, which are artifacts. The difference being that with artifacts and equip cards, if a creature dies, such as this one, this is a nice equip card, if the creature dies, then the artifact that's the equipment actually stays on the field. You just have to pay the casting cost, or the equip cost, rather, to equip it to a different enemy. The last thing I wanted to talk about was color type, or rarity types. So, the base level is called common. They're black, where it says D15. Yeah, you will have so many of these. People usually throw them away or write on them and use them as tokens. Whatever needs to get done, people they're pretty much garbage, to be honest. You'll have so many of them if you buy boosters. Then we move on to uncommon. Some uncommons are more uncommon than others, or more difficult to find in general, and do more for you. So because of that, you might want to keep them and use them for trade a little bit more. Uncommons are typically a little bit more powerful than commons, and yeah, there's not really all that much to say about that. Then, oh yes, their color is silver instead of black. The next is gold. Now, gold cards are called rares. Rares typically have very good effects associated with them, such as this guy, or spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And in addition, whenever you cast a spell that targets this particular character, he gains +1/+1, an additional +1/+1 counter on him, and that makes him very powerful. So, rares are typically far more powerful than other cards. The difference, one of the key things too, is a lot of the times the synergy between rares is what you actually build the rest of your deck around. Now, that's very oversimplifying things, but for beginners, that's a pretty decent way of looking at it. The last card type are legendaries. Now, the thing with legendaries is, even though they're called legendary rarity, that doesn't necessarily make them legendaries themselves. For instance, if we look here, Baneslayer Angel. Rarity type is legendary. She's very powerful, and one of my favorite cards in the game. However, she is not called legendary, as opposed to Brimaz, King of the Orskos. He's actually called a legendary, which matches his rarity type. The thing here is, because he's called legendary creature, that little title alone makes him special. If 2 of the same legendary creatures come out on the field at the same time, whether controlled by 2 different players or the same player, both those creature cards are instantly sent to the graveyard. This is because legendaries are so powerful, specifically legendary creatures are so powerful, that if you have more than one of them, it becomes unfair. So they actually put in a special way to block that, saying anything that's called a legendary creature will be killed off as soon as it's put into play with more than one. So it's kind of interesting. You can actually use that in worst case scenario to kill off your opponent. If you say have a blue deck that can copy target opponent card, now you have it out in the field as well, and they both die instantly. As you can see though, legendaries are extremely, extremely powerful. This one lets you take an extra turn. Baneslayer Angel, flying, first strike, lifelink, protection, and a 5/5 for only 5 casting cost. And then we have Inferno Titan, one of my favorite cards. Whenever he enters the battlefield or is tapped, he deals 3 damage distributed any way you want between target creatures or players. Awesome. I love this guy. So, that pretty much covers all the card types for now. And next time, I'm going to walk through how to actually play a little bit. Anyways, guys, good luck. Have fun. Peace.